Yokohama, the new leader in high-performance radials, presents Auto Check with Tony Morris. The ad men say that Pontiac builds excitement. 2 years ago, when the new mid-engine Fiero was introduced, the sports car buying public started believing the slogan. The mid-engine, plastic-bodied Fiero looked like the start of something truly exciting. This year, a GT version of the car has been added to the lineup. It features a new engine and a modified body.
It is, I think, a derivative from the Indianapolis pace car last year, where they put all the spoilers in it, and it looked absolutely fantastic. And as a result, racing has obviously improved the breed back to come into a road car and put beautiful spoilers on it again, front and rear. The only thing I would criticize on it is that if the car was down 6 more inches, it would look even better.
Function generally follows form, and in the Fiero's case, we felt that lowering the car down a bit might improve its already impressive handling.
The old Fiero was a very neutral handling car, and the 1985 car is exactly the same with more speed. So as a result, it goes into the corners and it feels a little bit blah. You've really got to drive the car in the corners. Having driven mid-engine cars before, I've found that the only way to get them around the corner fast is to power steer them. In other words, you drive around the corner with the power from the throttle, an accelerator pedal, and you drive it around the corner. This car is no exception. It's exactly the same way. The disadvantage of this car to other mid-engine cars that I've driven is that it won't point in. In other words, you've really got to slow down the car, put the car into the corner, and then put the power on. And as a result, it comes out really slowly. Again, because of the gearbox. The gearbox needs that lower gear to make it come out with a punch. The main thing I would criticize in the handling department, the suspension department, is that the car would be much better off if it was down about 6 or 8 inches. It would give you a much better feeling to the road. The car rides very beautifully. I mean, much more than you'd expect from a sports car, and maybe that's what it lacks. Maybe that is the one big failing in it, is that it should ride a little bit harder.
Just about everyone who drove early Fieros wished the car had just a bit more power. The old Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine just didn't have it. Pontiac listened to the criticism and now offers a potent 2.8-liter fuel-injected V6. So the new engine solves all the problems, right? Well, just about, but not quite.
The V6 engine definitely gives the car much more pep. You can feel it immediately. It's a much smoother engine than the old 4-cylinder. But the engine and the gearbox combination is not as exciting as the old car in as much that the gearbox suited the engine. Now the gearbox is way, way over-geared for the V6 engine that's in it now. First gear could be lower, second gear could be lower, third gear. In other words, what we're trying to say is it should be a 5-speed gearbox in this car. The car lugs in every gear. There's a little indicator in the car to tell you when to shift. The actual shifting mechanism isn't sophisticated enough in this 4-speed gearbox to allow you to use the engine the way that you would very much like to use it.
When we take a car to Westwood to test it, we drive it harder and faster than would ever be allowed on the public thoroughfares. We're pleased to report that the brakes and tires supplied on the Fiero GT were more than up to what we asked of them.
This car does come with 14-inch Goodyear Eagle GTs, no problem in the tire department or wheel department whatsoever. And of course, in tune with that, we have got a 4-wheel disc brake system. We're up at Westwood Racetrack. We do tend to drive the cars to their limit to give you an honest opinion on them. And not once today did I have to worry about brakes. It's disc brake front, disc brake rear, and good-sized discs as well. No problem whatsoever there.
However, another part of the car did cause problems. The bulkhead between the driver's and passenger seats is too high, and it interferes with gear changing and steering.
One thing I would criticize, though, in the steering, as we go around this corner here, you can see my right arm is trapped against this mechanism. As a result, as you're coming into a corner very fast and you're trying to turn, your arm gets trapped completely, and you've got to pull yourself under, and then as you come back out the corner again, your arm's stuck again. I don't really know why Pontiac didn't take this away. I'm sure in later models they will.
The Fiero GT offers a high level of comfort and luxury to the buyer with $18,000 to spend.
It has got air conditioning in this car, it has got power windows, it's got absolutely everything in the car that you would want. It's definitely a good little sports car with a few reservations on the handling and the gearbox. If the ideal car in this class, which again we'll try and find you, was a 10, I would give this car a 7.5. Of course, that's in the handling department and the engine and the gearbox, which was criticized. With the outside styling, the plastic body, as we explained, I would give it another extra half point, so that I would bring this car up to an easy 8.
The 1983 Fiero was the first car we ever tested on AutoCheck. At that time, we were excited by the car's potential. 2 years later, the car is much improved, but our opinion hasn't really changed. Future Fieros with a little more work could and probably will be even better than it is now at its present stage of its evolution. This week, our thanks go to Carter Pontiac for supplying us with our test car, and of course to Tony Morris for his help with AutoCheck. We'll see you next week. AutoCheck has been a presentation of Yokohama, the new leader in high-performance radial tires. Tonight on AutoCheck, we'll try out one of the few truly new sports cars to come along in quite a while. This is Toyota's new MR2, M for mid-engine, R for rear-wheel drive, and 2 for 2 seats. Not only is the MR2 new, but by today's standard, it's fairly affordable at about $15,000. The MR2 is pleasing to the eye, although some people may be a bit disappointed that Toyota engineers didn't come up with something a bit more dynamic, given that they began with a clean sheet of paper. The sunroof makes the cockpit bright and reduces the feeling of claustrophobia that often accompanies mid-engine cars. On the rear deck perches the spoiler that seems almost mandatory for modern sports cars. The styling of the car holds the promise of exciting performance. The MR2 does not disappoint, thanks largely to the 1600cc double overhead cam 16-valve engine. Even in detuned North American trim, the engine puts out 112 horsepower, which is plenty for a car weighing just a whisker over 2,000 pounds. On the track, Tony found that the high-revving little engine coupled to Toyota's excellent 5-speed transaxle made for spirited motoring.
No problem at all to go from the steering wheel to the gear shift, and the gears are fairly close. To make the gears work properly, however, you've got to use the revs, the RPM, the revs per minute of the engine. And the engine doesn't dislike high RPM. In fact, it really works well at the high RPM. It has cable arrangement between the gear shift and the mid-engine, and it works very nicely. I've missed one shift today, but I'm sure there's no reason why going from second to third that you'd have the same problem as I had. I went too fast and went right into 5th gear, but normally going from second to third, there's no problem whatsoever.
The underpinnings are just what you expect on a modern sports car: independent suspension and 4-wheel disc brakes.
The suspension in the car is 4 independent McPherson struts with coil springs on the outside. Not an unusual suspension characteristic in any of these new modern high-tech 1985 cars. But it does work very well. At first, a la X19 Fiat, which this car was basically, maybe not basically designed to compete with, but in the marketplace in Europe, it's definitely its main contender. But the X19 was built the same way as the Toyota has been now. But this is a much more sophisticated suspension setup than Fiat ever had, I can promise you. The brakes in the car are 4 disc brakes, front and rear. It's biased 55-45 from back to front. In other words, because it's a mid-engine car, they put more braking in the back than in the front, and it makes the car sit down very, very nice and squat, except when you're going into a corner really fast and braking. Now, that's not a thing that you should do in a rear-engine car, no matter what. It's a very bad thing. But today, going into turn 4 at Westwood, you do have to brake and turn at the same time, and as a result, it picks the rear end up, and it sort of pendulums the car around. And you may see that we had a couple of little problems with it, working between oversteer and understeer.
Given that tires are one of the most important factors affecting a car's handling, we were amazed by Toyota's decision to supply Canadian MR2s with all-season radial tires. Tires that are simply not up to the handling and performance of the rest of the car.
The wheel and tire combination is a Toyota Mag with a Dunlop, would you believe, all-season radial on it. When I took the car out first thing this morning, I was very, very dissatisfied with the handling in the car. In fact, it was to the point where I thought it was fairly dangerous. However, we checked tire pressures, and as the day has progressed, I'm pleased I didn't give it a rating first thing this morning and left it to later on this afternoon, because the handling of the car has definitely improved. It's basically an oversteer. In other words, the tail end of the car tends to come out. It's controlled oversteer though, and you can control it with a throttle. I'm sure you wouldn't actually, in driving it to the office or anything like that, ever even think about the oversteer characteristics in it. But it is definitely a concern when you're at high speeds and into quite wide or tight corners. Either of the two, you get an oversteer characteristic in it.
A check with Toyota Canada revealed that they'd had high-speed stability problems with the car when using snow tires on the rear only, so decided to go for the all-season radials instead. Our advice would be to save the all-seasons for the winter and invest in a good set of performance tires for the rest of the year. Another problem, albeit small, came to light during our test.
The one big point I would criticize in the car, and it's happened on a few occasions to me today, which again you may see, is that the brake pedal and the clutch pedal are rubber mounted. In other words, the face of the pedal is rubber, and on the throttle pedal they put a plastic material. I have leather shoes on, and it slipped off on 2 or 3 occasions just when I wanted the power. And as a result, we spun the car on one occasion because my foot slid off the throttle pedal. A small point. I'm sure if you had running shoes on, there'd be no problem, but I'm sure most people buying this car at $15,000 won't be going out in running shoes.
Because of the sharply raked hood and huge windshield, the visibility is excellent from the cockpit of the MR2. The seats are comfortable and they provide good lateral support. All in all, the MR2 comes together as a very pleasant sports car package.
The look of the car is quite futuristic. I personally am impressed with the car. You may not be. It may be a love-hate relationship. This quite often happens with new cars on the market. However, if the ideal car in this class, which we'll try and find you, is a 10, I would give this car an 8.3.
Toyota's new MR2 sports car was designed to fill a pretty large hole in the performance car market, and from what we've seen today, it's going to do a pretty good job of living up to that ambition. This week, our thanks go to Toyota Canada for supplying us with our test car, to the Sports Car Club of BC for allowing us to use Westwood Racing Circuit, and of course to Tony Morris of Circuit Tire. We'll see you next week for another edition of Auto Check. Auto Check has been a presentation of Yokohama, the new leader in high-performance radial tires. The Honda Prelude is a difficult car to pigeonhole. It looks and performs like a sports car, yet it sips gas like an economy car, and it's priced somewhere between the two. Our test car, dolled up with optional extras like a rear deck spoiler and fancy wheels, was listed at just a little more than $14,000. Not bad in this day and age for a car that will seat 4 in a pinch and will provide spirited motoring to boot. This year's Prelude is virtually unchanged from last year's car. It still offers an 1800cc engine producing 100 horsepower, driving the front wheels through Honda's absolutely flawless 5-speed overdrive transmission.
The 1800cc motor that Honda have got in this little Prelude has got a 12-valve cylinder head and twin carburetors. Quite an unusual thing in modern cars. Carburation isn't really the way to go, but they've made this 1800cc car really, really run fast and all through the gears. Make it work properly, it's up in the 6,500 to 7,000 RPM range all the time, and I think that may be taxing the engine a little bit. The power, I'm satisfied with it. It would be nice to see this little car with a V6, and I'm led to believe that in Europe there's a V6 available, so no doubt we'll get it in North America pretty soon. It's one of the fastest small cars, front-wheel drive, that we've had around the racetrack here, and I just couldn't believe just how fast it went.
The suspension system in the Prelude is typically Honda, 4-wheel independent McPherson struts. The brakes are disc front and drum rear. 4-wheel disc brakes would be nice, but they would cost more. Another thing that is traditionally Honda about the Prelude is the handling. It understeers.
It rides very, very nicely. It's not a sports car juddery ride. It's not a sedan sloppy ride. It's quite a nice firm ride. With slightly uneven drive shafts in this car in the front for front-wheel drive, as you go into the corner, you get understeer. Not overly vicious understeer like we've talked about in the old Civics, but definitely there's a mode of understeer. And as a result, with a disc brake front brake and a drum brake rear brake, when you're going in a corner very hard, the tail tends to pendulum on you. It starts to come around and it sets the car up, and you must put the power down immediately. you get into the corner and then the car starts to understeer, it pushes back out again, and you've got to think about it, there's no doubt about it, and Honda have been so guilty of this for so many years. We've been doing auto check 2 years now, and we've tested quite a few Hondas, and each time I test it, I comment on this understeer, and it's something that other manufacturers have cured, that Honda seem not to cure and not to be too interested in curing. So that's a big criticism in the car. I really do work hard as much as I can for you to tell you the limit of the car. And the understeer comes in at the limit of the car. It's not something that you'd pick up on and go back to the dealer and say, this car is terrible, it's the understeer. It's not that. When I was driving the car today, as hard as the car would go, that's when the understeer was really noticeable, and that's where the criticism comes in all the Hondas.
The wheels on our test car were an extra cost option, but for our money, they weren't worth it. Another thing that is beyond us is why Honda persists in its love affair with 13-inch wheels.
The wheel tire combination in the car, I'm not too impressed with. It's one thing that I'd definitely change, and in fact, I've changed these cars, these Preludes, and put 15-inch wheels on. The wheels that are on the car right now are Honda 13-inch with Bridgestone 185/70/13s. The car really does ask for more tire.
The interior of the car is a testament to Honda's efficient use of available space. The seats would not be out of place in a car costing twice as much. The visibility is excellent, and the power sunroof provides ongoing pleasure. Take all of that into consideration, and you have the basis for Tony's rating.
We've discussed in AutoCheck in the last couple of years just what do you get for your money. And at $14,000, this is good value. If I was going to rate the car today in the value range rather than trying to compare it with other cars, I would give this car a 9.2.
As you can probably tell from our test, we like the Honda Prelude a lot. We feel it's a car that represents good value for the money, and that's probably the reason that they're selling so well. This week, our thanks to Honda Canada for supplying us with our test car, to the Sports Car Club of BC for allowing us to use Westwood Racing Circuit, and of course to Tony Morris of Circuit Tire. AutoCheck returns next week.